Thank you, Mark, and welcome back, everyone. I'm going to begin today with a song. This is from a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, Zichrona Laracha, the Vietnamese master, called Call Me by My True Names. So I invite you to just settle in and enjoy. My joy is like a spring so warm, it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast that it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true name, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so that I can wake up and the door of my heart can be left open. My joy is like a spring so warm, it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast that it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true name, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so that I can wake up and the door of my heart can be left open. So welcome back. Welcome to day 4 of our intensive on cultivating joy and playfulness and delight, both as a skillful means in our cultivation of mindful presence and also as a fruit of the practice. It has already come up a lot in the last few days, the way that joy and playfulness do not negate sorrow or grief or confusion or anger. And this idea that simcha in the Jewish tradition, that joy is really about feeling any of our feelings fully. It's about uninhibited expression of the truth of those feelings moving through us. And I also want to be clear that bringing forward the importance and value of joy is not to say that we should feel it all the time, right? We are human beings with a full spectrum of emotions. And again, this is where the intelligence of our Hebrew calendar can structurally represent for us the value, even the beauty of there being space and a time and a right moment to fully feel the full spectrum of what we experience in our lives as human beings. There's a place for all of it. In the Megillah story that we've been exploring this week in Purim, indeed, everything is actually, it's not a fun moment, right? Everything is headed to doom and destruction. That's what it seems like. It's a dire moment. It's a difficult moment that then flips on its head and turns into celebration, turns into rejoicing. And so this practice is not only about being happy and joyful, but relating to whatever is arising in our experience in a way that acknowledges its truth and its value with care. I don't know about you all, but I grew up, I think a lot of us do, with the notion that some emotions are good, right? Like happiness and joy and excitement and peace, and others are bad: anger, sadness, grief, confusion. But our tradition actually teaches that all feelings, all emotions are like angels, are messengers of our soul. They're all sacred. They all carry some truth. And today I want to explore with you the ways that joy and enjoyment, pleasure, are not at all separate from the challenging aspects of our lives. The relationship between joy and pleasure with these emotions that we might label as negative or that are more challenging. And the ways that cultivating through practice enjoyment and pleasure actually helps us to meet the challenges that we face with more resilience, as well as more clarity, a more balanced perspective as to the whole. And I want to start with just emphasizing again that in the Jewish tradition, there's a real place and value for enjoyment and celebration and even pleasure and sensorial delight. Unlike other religions, some other religions, which are more negating of indulgence and sensorial delight. But in the Jewish tradition, pleasure is holy. Our senses are a great gift. We're not meant to negate them, but to experience them, to really even feast upon them in the right moments, in the right ways. One example, of course, is Shabbat, right? Where we are meant to experience oneg, deep sensorial delight and feasting and singing and being together. On Shabbat, this pleasure, this delight is part of the vayinafash, the renewal of our soul, the renewal of our spirit. It's part of what it means to be fully present and in touch with the possibility of wholeness on Shabbat. And in Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs, composed by King Solomon, it's basically a deep celebration of our senses. Right? It says such lines as, the blossoms have appeared in the land, the time of pruning has come, the song of the turtle dove, the green figs on the fig tree, the vines in blossom that give off fragrance. So being in touch with delight and pleasure and enjoyment through our senses is part of the gift of being human. And so much of what we wake up to in this practice is the beauty and the loveliness of life, often in incredibly subtle and simple ways. And often when other more challenging and difficult experiences are happening also. And this beauty, this pleasure is true even in the impermanence, even in the transience of our experience. I remember on one of my first meditation retreats, with Rabbi James Jacobson Meisels from Or Halev, I remember someone asked him, how do you know when the practice is working? Because it can feel so subtle. How do you know when you're doing it right? And I remember he gave the answer, part of the answer he gave was, sometimes after a sit, I open my eyes and I just realize it's like the light on the carpet suddenly captures my attention. There's something beautiful about it. Even in a subtle way, I'm more in touch with the beauty. And so there's this way that sensing the pleasure and loveliness is actually a source of guidance on the path of mindfulness, on the path of awakening. It's like if we suddenly notice that we're more in touch, even in very simple and basic ways, with the beauty of this experience, it's a good sign. And of course, mindfulness practice in a fundamental way is really helping us to see that we are often in habituated patterns of grasping onto pleasant experiences, right? Like clinging on to what feels good and craving it and wanting more of it, attaching. And that is not what I'm encouraging. That's not what I'm talking about here. Actually, what I'm talking about is to the contrary. Because what we find is that when we cling on to something beautiful, cling on to something pleasant, sometimes that clinging itself turns it into a not so pleasant experience. But we can hold it lightly. We can hold it in open palm, knowing the truth of its transience, and allow ourselves to fully enjoy it and take it in with that light hold, with that appreciation for the beauty even in the transience as it arises and passes away. So we're holding with an open palm, the way that we would hold a flower or a baby bird, something alive, right? It's not about clinging, but holding. And I want to also acknowledge that, many of us are working with conditioning in our society, or maybe from other religious traditions, that is not native to the Jewish tradition, that pleasure is in some way indulgent or wrong. The author and activist Adrienne Marie Brown wrote a whole book called Pleasure Activism about how pleasure in some way actually is essential to revolution, to resistance, to creating the world that we dream of. She writes, "Pleasure is not one of the spoils of capitalism. It is what our bodies, our human systems are structured for. It is the aliveness and awakening, the gratitude and humility, the joy and celebration of being miraculous." Pleasure is the joy and celebration of being miraculous. And similarly, access to pleasurable and enjoyable experiences has been shown scientifically to have a direct link to our resilience in hard times. Our resilience, meaning our ability to bounce back when we go through hardship. The psychologist and author, Dr. Rick Hansen, has done some beautiful writing and work in the neuroscience of happiness in his book, Hardwiring Happiness. He's wrote a few books, that's one of them. And he speaks to this relationship between pleasure and enjoyment and resilience. He writes that we learn from science that our brains are hardwired to notice the negative more than the positive because it keeps us safe. That's called our negativity bias. Just acknowledging that our nervous system has been evolving for 600 million years. And so solutions to survival problems faced by ancient reptiles and mammals and primates and humans are still active in our brains. The brain developed this negativity bias that looks for bad news, reacts intensely to it, and then quickly extors that experience in the neural structure. So, of course, this negativity bias is really important for our safety, right? When we notice something burning, we want to say, what's that smell? It's really important to notice something that might be unpleasant if we're in danger. But usually we're not, right? Usually we're not actually in a moment of needing to tend to our survival. And our brains are simply not as hardwired to notice the positive and give the positive as much weight. So if I am noticing how wonderful my morning latte smells, that's lovely, but it won't help me survive necessarily, right? And while that negativity bias is helpful for survival, it's not that great for our quality of life or fulfilling relationships or long-term health. It can make us overlearn from bad experiences and underlearn from the good ones. Just share with you some examples from my own life. When I first started teaching on retreat, one of the first retreats I taught on, meditation retreats, there were like 80 people on the retreat. And I received overwhelmingly positive feedback from most people. But there were 2 people that just did not really enjoy my teaching and really were not into it and wrote some pretty harsh feedback. And so because of this negativity bias, I noticed how I was hooked into those 2 people's feedback, even though there were 20, 30, 40, 50 people who said quite wonderful things. Another example is one weekend, I left the kitchen a mess accidentally, and I texted my roommate. I was away. I texted her apologizing, and she didn't get back to me for 2 days. And so in my head, I was thinking, oh my God, she hates me. She's so angry. She wants to leave. She's going to leave. She's going to ask me to leave, making up all these stories, right? What happened? I got home. She was like, oh, I totally missed your text. I was also away all weekend, right? I was totally busy with my friend. How are you? Oh, no problem. It's like, this happens all the time. There's this negative bias in the brain that tends to make up these stories. And the good news is that we can actually rewire our brains to take in more of the good and to bask in it. And this can actually help us to bring a more balanced perspective to the bigger picture. It's about expanding our view of what is here. And I want to be really clear that the practice of noticing and taking in the good is not about dismissing what is hard in our lives, but it's acknowledging that multiple things can be true at the same time. And noticing and taking in what is good, maybe even through gratitude practice, helps us to expand our perspective, to notice what is lovely, what is delightful, what is going well, along with everything else that's true. So it's not putting on rose-colored glasses, but helping us to actually see with a more balanced perspective on everything that is true. I remember one time on a retreat, I was in a meeting with a teacher and was sharing with her, I feel like my heart, I was having an experience of tremendous grief. And I was just sharing with her, I feel like my heart is just wanting me to really feel and acknowledge the truth of some of the hardship that I've been through and some of the brokenness in our world. And I was really in that. And I just remember she said to me, she acknowledged the truth of what I was saying and the importance of it. And she said, kind of with a gentle prodding, she was like, perhaps your heart is also asking you to notice what is going well, to notice the blessings as well. And I realized both are true and both are possible. And actually to acknowledge both brings me into more mindfulness, into closer contact with the truth and the wholeness, the bigger picture of this experience. So we can take time to bask in the positive, to bask in the goodness, and that helps us to wire those experiences into our implicit memory, which is the unconscious foundation of how we feel and how we function, so that we can have more resilience and bounce back a little more easily in times of hardship. And I want to also just say that it can be wonderful to pair that kind of practice with gratitude. Gratitude situates us in our interconnectedness, right? Acknowledging that we're part of something greater. And whether we're practicing gratitude or taking in the good, it's a practice, right? It's not a feeling. And so if we don't feel it right away, that's okay. It's something we cultivate, like we're planting seeds. And then we can notice over time how those seeds might sprout, how they might impact our quality of life and our ability to be fully present. And so in a way, this practice that I want to introduce to you today, basking in the good, basking in the goodness, it's really simple. There are many informal ways we can practice. It's really just about noticing, even through the senses, in subtle ways, some loveliness, some pleasure throughout our day. And then when we notice that, actually taking time to linger, actually taking time to bask in it, in the same way that we might automatically do with more negative things, right? Actually taking that time to linger and bask in it so that it really gets stored deep down in there. One last story I'll tell you before we begin, just as an example, is one time I was in a therapy session on Zoom, and I had chosen that morning a really beautiful blue ceramic mug for my coffee. And my therapist just pointed out, she was like, that's a really beautiful mug. And I said back, I was like, yeah, I really actually had a moment of choosing this mug, and it really brought me so much pleasure. Something so simple, just the beautiful blue color of this mug. And I remember in that therapy session, actually pausing what I was talking about and just for a moment tapping into the appreciation for the beauty of that incredibly simple thing, and that I'd chosen that. And that totally shifted the session. It put me back in touch with my appreciation for beauty and that small way in which I chose to value that morning. And so we're noticing the good. We're allowing these small and subtle things to matter, and we're lingering with it. And so we're going to begin our practice today with a practice of accessing the good, perhaps even through gratitude, through the five senses. And that'll lead us into our mindful sit. And so I want to go ahead and invite you to settle into your seat. You might close the eyes if that is comfortable for you, or just soften the gaze. Give yourself a moment to just land back in the body. You might notice what is stirring within you emotionally or mentally from this teaching. There's no right or wrong. Just welcoming whatever is here to be here with kindness. You might invite the body to relax, perhaps noticing if you're holding any tension, and simply softening. Noticing also the uprightness of the posture, inviting that sense of wakefulness, of presence. We're going to begin our sit today by simply bringing to mind some sources of goodness, of loveliness, of gratitude that we may have experienced over the last day or so, or that we're experiencing right now through the five senses. And so I invite you to bring your attention to something that feels really good against your skin, something you're touching. Or it could be a memory of something that you touched over the last 24 hours that was in some way pleasant. Just spend a few moments lingering in that sensation of pleasure, of loveliness through touch. It could be something very subtle, very simple. And just allow yourself to bask in that. Perhaps simply the feeling of the pillow in your bed last night, or putting on a warm pair of socks. Giving a hug to a friend or loved one. Just lingering in that sensation or the memory of that sensation. And now I invite you to bring to mind something over the last 24 hours that smelled really good. Maybe something baking in the oven or a candle. Even the smell of someone you love. And allow yourself to simply linger, bask in the memory of that sensation. Now I invite you to bring to mind something that you tasted over the last day or so that was delicious. I'm thinking of a hamantaschen that a friend made on Purim. And just lingering in that memory and that sensation, deliciousness. And exploring the sensation of sight. Is there something that you gazed upon over the last day or so that was pleasant, that was lovely in some way? A beautiful sunset, beautiful space. Just recalling the memory of that sight and just basking in it, staying with it, lingering there. And finally, something over the last day or so that you heard that made you feel good. Some music, someone's voice. The sound of birds. And just lingering there. Now I invite you to bring to mind any other memory over the last day or so, the last week, that was in some way pleasant, perhaps in a very subtle way or a really significant way. What about it was lovely? Allow yourself to just linger in that felt sense of loveliness, of pleasure. not in a grasping way, just in a beauty way, appreciating the beauty. The gift of loveliness. Bringing your attention into this present moment, noticing what is here. Is there something in this very moment that is in some way pleasant? Even just the feeling of breath, heartbeat, the sense of togetherness here. Just rest our mind, rest our attention. And something that is in some way pleasant about this experience. Remembering that it's a practice, not a feeling. So if you don't feel anything, that's okay. You're planting seeds, gently inviting the mind in this direction, noticing the good. I invite you to take 5 more deep breaths. I invite you to open your eyes if they've been closed, taking your time. Just noticing what's present within you, around you. Thank you so much for your presence and your practice today. Wonderful to be with you. And I wish you plenty of enjoyment as you go out and take some time to really linger in the goodness, linger in what is lovely and pleasant as you notice that throughout your day. I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I'm going to go pick out a really nice mug for some tea after this. Everyone, of course, at this point is invited to seal this beautiful practice of cultivating joy through attention to pleasure by we offer this opportunity for those of you who are in mourning or observing a yard site, or if you participate in Kaddish, to do so. And if you're not, to stay present and provide a supportive minyan of comfort for those who are. And if you're reciting Kaddish and you'd like to put the name or names of those you're remembering today, honoring today in the chat box, you're welcome to do so now or after we recite Kaddish. And thanks to Jet, who's holding our space today, for sharing the words on the screen for the mourner's Kaddish. And if you are reciting it with me, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit to recite the words together. And you can unmute at this time. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Rabba, Amad, Yibrach, Yitve, Yamlich, Malchutay, Chayeton, Shme Rabba Malach Shlama Rabba Mishmaya, Hayamalim Israel, Yaseh Shalom Imamav, Yaseh Shalom, Yalko Yisrael, Yalko Yoshvei Tevel.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
This is so. This very essence is being.
And friends, thank you so much, of course, for joining us today in this beautiful week of practice together. And we'll wrap it up tomorrow with our final session in this series. Just looking ahead, by the way, in 2 weeks, our colleague Rabbi Maria Margles will be leading also a week-long series. It will be the week before Passover. So we'll introduce themes that are derived from the Passover Seder each day, and the meditation will focus on a particular aspect of the Seder. So it's really meant to help us prepare spiritually for the Seder and for Passover. Really looking forward to that, just letting you know about that. And if you're leaving us now, we hope you'll join us tomorrow to wrap up this week of practice together. As always, you're welcome to stay on right now for conversation with Rebecca about today's teaching and practice, to share reflections if you'd like, or just to use the time and space and the container of this community to sit together. So thanks for being here. And if you do have a question for Rebecca, please put in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. And here we go. If it's a question, please put question. Preface it with question, all caps. That's great. That was great, Rebecca. Thank you so much. And I was thinking about, at least my experience has been that sometimes mindfulness meditation teachers will invite us just to kind of notice what's happening and notice, the pleasant, what's unpleasant, and what's neither, what's kind of neutral in some way. And this practice today felt like you were inviting us really to pay special attention, right, to that which is pleasant or pleasurable in some way. I guess that negativity bias that you brought up raises the theory, I guess maybe it's proven by data, that our mind is drawn to the unpleasant much more than to the pleasant, right? So I just want to invite you to talk about that, because I guess I was thinking about the question I was going to ask you was really about like, well, what about the objections? How do you handle the objections that come up when we do that? But this is a slightly different question. The question is really like in a meditation like this, where we are searching out that which is pleasurable, and you were kind of encouraging people by thinking about like something we've tasted, something we've heard, something we felt, something we've seen. How does that work with then also noticing that which is unpleasant?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with that part?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I'll address a few different parts of what you shared. You mentioned that there's one of the kind of essential instructions in mindfulness practice is noticing valence. Mm-hmm. Noticing the quality of what is arising in our experience, and it's generally pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And the value of that practice is that when we pay attention to that valence, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral of what is emerging, we also notice that we generally have a wired-in automatic tendency to hold on to what is pleasant and grasp it and attach to it and want more of it, to push away what is unpleasant, to want to resist it, and we become very averse to it, and then basically to ignore what is neutral, which is actually a lot of our experience. So we totally zone out and go off the radar. And what that's doing, and we also start to notice this in our practice.
Can you actually just hit pause there for a second about the neutral? Because I guess there's something, it's interesting because, I guess some people will sometimes describe that as like being bored. I was thinking like the neutral is not interesting, right? The mind is not attracted to the neutral and searches for either the pleasant or the unpleasant, right? That's another bias built in there.
Absolutely.
We don't like neutral.
Neutral is not worthy of our attention. But then when we start paying attention to our lives, we realize how much of our lives is really so neutral. It's paying the bills, it's doing the laundry, it's taking the kids up for daycare, it's whatever it is. It's actually
so boring.
So when we're zoning out, we're actually missing out on the opportunity of a deeper sense of aliveness and freshness and vitality that is there in the experiences that we perceive as neutral. And that was kind of the example I gave of Rabbi James, just mentioning, sometimes like when I open my eyes after sitting, I realize, hey, the carpet looks really beautiful. It's like when we start to actually pay attention to the neutral and let all of our experiences moment by moment be worthy of our attention, life can become much more imbued with vitality and freshness. And
yeah. Well, this, I didn't mean to derail you here, but in a way, like bringing attention to the pleasant or pleasurable can shed light on that, quote unquote, boring or neutral aspect. Like your mug story is a good example of that, right? Like,
and that's people often share that on retreat. They share, wow, I noticed that when I start actually paying attention to the neutral and getting curious about it rather than ignoring it, it suddenly became pleasant.
Mm-hmm. And just to put it in kind of classic Jewish terms, it's kind of sanctifying the mundane, right? That which is right, seeing the holy in that which does not appear at first glance to be holy. Okay, sorry. Let's get back on track. Okay.
So then back to what I was saying. I mean, I mentioned this in the teaching, but with basking in the good, taking time to linger in the good and and even search for what is lovely, what is pleasant, what is going well, that is not an invitation to grasp on and cling. Because that does cause suffering. That's kind of part of the essence of like the teachings of mindfulness, to notice that when we are averse and clinging, that we're causing unnecessary suffering. And that's not what I'm advocating for. I think in mindfulness practice, there's often there's like this idea that basically we have two options in how we relate to our experience. And the first one is either to hold it tightly, and the other one is either to completely let go.
Mhm.
I want to offer a middle way, which is that we can have preferences. Of course, we have a preference to enjoy our lives. The Jewish tradition really is guiding us in that direction, that life is a gift and our sensorial capacity is a gift. And there's a way, I think, that we can hold those preferences and hold the enjoyment of the experience, again, with an open palm. So it's not about holding tightly and wanting it to last forever, but it's about holding it the way that we would hold anything that's precious and alive, with space and with trust, that things will come and go. And that doesn't mean that we can't fully appreciate the beauty and the goodness when it is present with us.
Here's a question, always a good question from Lori. I noticed that my mind, even at rest, was looking at what needed to be, quote unquote, solved, a habit that's encouraged at work and home. How do we release the need to turn over stones and solve things at all times? I don't know if that falls into the unpleasant category or like problem, like searching for problems to fix.
Yeah, I think there are many different kind of patterns and habits in the mind that just get wired in really deeply. So it really makes sense that if we're spending a lot of time at work, engaged in a particular way of thinking, that when we sit down to meditate, that's what arises. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the nature of the mind. And this idea that what we pay attention to grows stronger. So, and that's part of the plastic of the brain also, which is a really wonderful thing. It means that we have choice and agency in how we want to kind of rewire our brains, and mindfulness has been shown to do that. So to Lori's question, I would say the first thing is just to become aware of that habit of mine, non-judgmentally, with kindness. Like, it makes so much sense that that habit is there, and then to just be aware of it and stay with the practice of returning to the anchor, of noticing the present moment, noticing the body, inviting that sense of softening and release.
Here's another thing that actually comes up for me quite a bit. That's like, it's just a teaching that sticks with me about the blessing of the non-toothache, of like, it's kind of it's a practice that's really based on the negativity bias of saying like, I'm always looking for the toothache, or when I have a toothache, I only think about the toothache or whatever it is, whatever little, whether it's a big physical challenge or a minor one, but fixation on it. Always notice that. Don't notice when that's not happening so much. So it reminds me, it's like, oh, thank God I don't have a toothache right now, So I wonder about that. Like, how do we, which is a variation on that, taking pleasure in what would seem to be like the unremarkable, right? The mug. It's just a mug, I just picked a mug, right?
And part of, I think, what's actually important about this practice of basking in the good and taking in the good is, again, I'm really just kind of repeating myself, but that we do that automatically with negative experiences. With negative experiences, we tend to automatically linger in them, ruminate on them, obsess over them, capitalize on them. And so the practice of actually doing that same thing, but with more positive experience, isn't to dismiss the hard things, but simply to bring more balance to our perception of our experience as a whole. Try to just bring a little bit of balance to that negativity bias in the brain, and where we're rewiring the brain so that we more readily can take positive experiences into our implicit memory, so that they're available there for us when we do go through hard things, and we can more easily just remember, things are actually like pretty okay right now, and that itself is a blessing. Right.
I always notice that when we do check-ins or whatever, when it has to do a check-in, like immediately go to, challenges, not necessarily where things that are fine, or the absence of challenges.
Yeah.
Now I'm blanking. I had a question.
I can just add something to that, Mark.
Sure.
I think it's interesting, like it's kind of an interesting tendency that I notice sometimes in communities that are really focused on healing, like even healing trauma or like self-improvement in general, or even within the mindfulness world, that it kind of just becomes another pattern in the mind.
Mhm.
Like, what am I going to fix now? What's wrong now? What, mindfulness, even it can become this kind of like, how am I not present? And just to notice that that's actually just another pattern in the mind to be aware of, that the work of healing, of learning, of spiritual growth doesn't need to be about seeking out what's wrong. It's really just about listening deeply to be aware of what is true in the moment and responding to that with love.
Mhm.
So, all of it can become new patterns in the mind, which is a beautiful thing. It's something to play with, but it's certainly something to become aware of.
That actually was my question. My question was actually going to be about that it was coming up for me was to feel one of the objections about taking in pleasure is not feeling worthy of it, not deserving it, or that it's like everything impermanent and will go. It's so like, why bother? But the connection between the capacity to experience love and to experience pleasure seems to me go hand in hand in that way also, right? To not push it away, that I'm not worthy of this. This is too good for me, right? Some way.
Absolutely.
How about if we again end with some music?
Okay.
How about that? Thich Nhat Hanh. You said the melody was from Plum Village.
Melody is from Plum Village, which is his meditation community in France. Yeah. My joy is like a spring so warm. It makes, let me turn the original sound on, sorry. Here we go, this is better. My joy is like a spring so warm. It makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast that it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so that I can wake up and the door of my heart will be left open. My joy is like a spring so warm. It makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast that it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so that I can wake up and the door of my heart can be left open.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. There's so much appreciation in the chat. Thank you so much. This has been a beautiful week, and we'll look forward to kind of our siyum, our conclusion, and wrap up tomorrow to sit into Shabbat together. Thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks so much, Jet, for holding our space as always. And many blessings, everyone.
Thank
Go
you.
pick out a good mug.
Yes. And by the way, also some folks asked, the painting is mine, and you can check out my art. It's on my website. So you can find that on the IJS website, my website, art website.
Great. See everyone tomorrow. Be well, everyone.
See you tomorrow.